Were I, who to my cost already am, one of those strange, prodigious creatures, man, a spirit free to choose for my own share what case of flesh and blood I'd please to wear, I'd be a dog, a monkey, or a bear, or anything but that vain animal who is so proud of being rational. When John Wilmot, Earl of Rochester, wrote these lines, sometime in the early 1670s, he was part of the selfish, cynical, rapacious, high-living and low-living court of Charles II. Rochester called the poem from which the lines come a satire against reason and mankind. And yet they seem, in a perverse way, to usher in what has been called the age of reason in their skepticism rather than their disillusionment. Rochester himself was extravagant, wild, obscene, a great roisterer and drinker. He said on his deathbed that for 5 years together he was continually drunk. And he died of his excesses at the age of 33. As a contemporary commentator put it, one man reads Milton, 40 Rochester. And it was as a writer of satire that he was particularly known. For about 80 years, from the restoration of Charles II in 1660, this is the great age of satirical English poetry. A poetry that can be savage and elegant, contemptuous and grand, all at the same time. Names are named, though often disguised. However, this was a tight-knit society in which everyone knew everyone else and the references wouldn't be missed. And it was a society in which misanthropy, loathing of mankind, could well seem truly founded. Contemptuous and witty, loathing and self-loathing, here is part of Rochester's A Satire Against Reason and Mankind.
Were I, who to my cost already am, one of those strange, prodigious creatures, man, a spirit free to choose for my own share what case of flesh and blood I'd please to wear, I'd be a dog, a monkey, or a bear, or anything but that vain animal who is so proud of being rational. The senses are too gross, and he'll contrive a sixth to contradict the other five, and before certain instinct will prefer reason, which 50 times for one does err. Reason, an ignis fatuus in the mind, which leaves the light of nature, sense, behind, pathless and dangerous, wandering ways it takes through errors, fenny bogs and thorny brakes, whilst the misguided follower climbs with pain mountains of whimsies heaped in his own brain. Stumbling from thought to thought, falls headlong down into doubt's boundless sea, where, like to drown, books bear him up a while and make him try to swim with bladders of philosophy. In hope still to o'ertake the escaping light, the vapor dances in his dazzled sight, till spent, it leaves him to eternal night. Then, old age and experience, hand in hand, lead him to death, and make him understand, after a search so painful and so long, that all his life he has been in the wrong. Huddled in dirt, this reasoning engine lies, who was so proud, so witty, and so wise.
For all his skill, Rochester was by no means a professional poet, not even a professional writer at all. Rochester's longer-lived contemporary, John Dryden, was a professional writer. His first notable verses were an elegy on Cromwell, published when he was 28. But a year later, equally public and professional, he published a poem on the happy restoration and return of His Sacred Majesty Charles II. Dryden's enemies didn't forget those verses on Cromwell, but he'd played his cards cleverly, and before long he was appointed Poet Laureate. Towards the end of his life, he wrote in a letter, "They say my talent is satire. If it be so, 'tis a fruitful age, and there is an extraordinary crop to gather." Some of that crop was literary, some political. Of Dryden's literary satires, Mac Flecknoe is his masterpiece, whose main targets are two actual poets, in particular Thomas Shadwell. Dryden imagines another poet, Richard Flecknoe, lying on his deathbed and appointing Shadwell to be his true successor as monarch of the realms of nonsense. As in almost all his satirical poetry, and as in most of the poetry in this program, the form Dryden used was the rhyming couplet, the so-called heroic couplet, often mock-heroic, in that it deliberately inflates trivial things and third-rate people as if they were majestic participants in a noble epic. Here are the opening lines of Dryden's Mac Flecknoe.
All human things are subject to decay, and when fate summons, monarchs must obey. This Flecknoe found, who, like Augustus, young was called to empire, and had governed long. In prose and verse was owned without dispute through all the realms of nonsense absolute. This aged prince, now flourishing in peace, and blessed with issue of a large increase, worn out with business, did at length debate to settle the succession of the state, and pondering which of all his sons was fit to reign and wage immortal war with wit, cried, "'Tis resolved, for nature pleads that he should only rule who most resembles me. Shadwell alone my perfect image bears, mature in dullness from his tender years. Shadwell alone of all my sons is he who stands confirmed in full stupidity. The rest to some faint meaning make pretense, but Shadwell never deviates into sense. Some beams of wit on other souls may fall, strike through and make a lucid interval, but Shadwell's genuine night admits no ray. His rising fogs prevail upon the day. Besides, his goodly fabric fills the eye and seems designed for thoughtless majesty. Thoughtless as monarch oaks that shade the plain and spread in solemn state supinely reign.
At the same time, Dryden found more important targets among some of the members of a court faction which seemed to him dangerous to Charles II, in particular the Earl of Shaftesbury, the Duke of Buckingham, and the Duke of Monmouth. Under an elaborate but transparent code of names drawn from the Bible, he used his satire as a direct political weapon. Take Charles to be King David, plotted against in the Bible, then Shaftesbury becomes Ahithophel, Buckingham becomes Zimri, and Monmouth becomes Absalom. The result was Dryden's long poem, Absalom and Ahithophel, a marvelous piece of public poetry. Here's what Dryden makes of the Duke of Buckingham, under the guise of the name Zimri. Buckingham was himself a wit and a playwright, and he'd already satirized Dryden in one of his own plays. But through its tough vigor, it's Dryden's portrait that survives, and whatever Buckingham said is now forgotten.
Some of their chiefs were princes of the land. In the first rank of these did Zimri stand, a man so various that he seemed to be not one, but all mankind's epitome. Stiff in opinions, always in the wrong, was everything by starts and nothing long. But in the course of one revolving moon was chemist, fiddler, statesman, and buffoon. Then all for women, painting, rhyming, drinking, besides 10,000 freaks that died in thinking. Blessed madman, who could every hour employ with something new to wish or to enjoy. Railing and praising were his usual themes, and both to show his judgment in extremes, so over violent or over civil, that every man with him was God or devil. In squandering wealth was his peculiar art. Nothing went unrewarded but desert. Beggared by fools, whom still he found too late, he had his jest, and they had his estate. He laughed himself from court, then sought relief by forming parties, but could ne'er be chief. For spite of him, the weight of business fell on Absalom, and wise Achitophel. Thus, wicked but in will, of means bereft, he left not faction, but of that was left.
Jonathan Swift is best known today as the author of Gulliver's Travels. He began writing poems as a young man in his 20s, and it is said that Dryden greeted these early efforts with the remark, "Cousin Swift, you will never be a poet." Certainly, Swift always thought of Dryden with malevolence. But in fact, he wrote a great deal of poetry, much of it very good, and most of it rather more genial and rather less savage than his prose. By this time, that is, by the early 18th century, there was a large number of professional writers, journalists and hacks and poetasters. Swift, though ordained a clergyman, was also a professional writer, with a haughty and sardonic view of the mob of struggling mercenary writers, the denizens of Grub Street, and those bad poets who filled the pages of the press. Using shorter rhyming lines on the heroic couplets of Dryden, Swift managed something nimble, dry, and astringent, as in his mocking piece on poetry, A Rhapsody, from which these lines are taken.
Hobbes clearly proves that every creature lives in a state of war by nature. The greater for the smaller watch, but meddle seldom with their match. A whale of moderate size will draw a shoal of herrings down his maw. A fox with geese his belly crams. A wolf destroys 1,000 lambs. But search among the rhyming race. The brave are worried by the base. If on Parnassus' top you sit, you rarely bite, are always bit. Each poet of inferior size on you shall rail and criticize, and try to tear you limb from limb, while others do as much for him. The vermin only tease and pinch their foes superior by an inch. So, naturalists observe, a flea hath smaller fleas which on him prey, and these have smaller yet to bite him, and so proceed ad infinitum. Thus, every poet in his kind is bit by him that comes behind, who, though too little to be seen, can tease and gall and give the spleen, call dunces, fools, and sons of whores, lay Grub Street at each other's doors, extol the Greek and Roman masters, and curse our modern poetasters. Complain, as many an ancient bard did, how genius is no more rewarded, how wrong a taste prevails among us, how much our ancestors outsun us. Can personate an awkward scorn for those who are not poets born. And all their brother dunces lash, who crowd the press with hourly trash.
Swift was Anglo-Irish. He was born in Dublin of English parents, and later became Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in that city. Though he'd hoped for a post in England and in some ways felt isolated to be in Ireland, his attitude to the Irish people was a great deal more understanding and more liberal than that of many Englishmen before and since. It was during his time in Ireland and thinking of his friends there as well as in England that he wrote his delightful long poem, Verses on the Death of Dr. Swift, with gaiety, with little digs at friends and enemies, and with an appropriate view of his own kind of satire. Here's part of that mocking self-elegy, Verses on the Death of Dr. Swift.
Behold the fatal day arrive. How is the Dean? He's just alive. Now the departing prayer is read. He hardly breathes. The Dean is dead. Before the passing bell begun, the news through half the town has run. Oh, may we all for death prepare. What has he left, and who's his heir? I know no more than what the news is. 'Tis all bequeathed to public uses. To public use? A perfect whim. What had the public done for him? Mere envy, avarice, and pride. He gave it all. But first, he died. And had the Dean in all the nation no worthy friend, no poor relation, so ready to do strangers good, forgetting his own flesh and blood? Here shift the scene, to represent how those I love my death lament. Poor Pope will grieve a month, and Gay a week, and Arbuthnot a day. St. John himself will scarce forbear to bite his pen and drop a tear. The rest will give a shrug and cry, I'm sorry, but we all must die. My female friends, whose tender hearts have better learned to act their parts, receive the news in doleful dumps. The Dean is dead. And what is trumps? The Lord have mercy on his soul. Ladies, I'll venture for the bowl. 6 deans, they say, must bear the pall. I wish I knew what king to call. Madam, your husband will attend the funeral of so good a friend? No, madam, 'tis a shocking sight, and he's engaged tomorrow night. My Lady Club would take it ill if he should fail her at quadrille. He loved the Dean. I led a heart. But dearest friends, they say, must part. His time was come. He ran his race. We hope he's in a better place. Perhaps I may allow the Dean had too much satire in his vein, and seemed determined not to starve it, because no age could more deserve it. Yet malice never was his aim. He lashed the vice, but spared the name. No individual could resent where thousands equally were meant. His satire points at no defect, but what all mortals may correct. For he abhorred that senseless tribe who call it humor when they jibe. He spared a hump or crooked nose, whose owners set not up for bows. True genuine dullness moved his pity, unless it offered to be witty. Those who their ignorance confessed, he ne'er offended with a jest, but laughed to hear an idiot quote a verse from Horace, learned by rote. He knew 100 pleasant stories with all the turns of Whigs and Tories, was cheerful to his dying day, and friends would let him have his way. He gave the little wealth he had to build a house for fools and mad, and showed by one satiric touch no nation wanted it so much. That kingdom he hath left his debtor. I wish it soon may have a better.
One of Swift's closest friends and greatest admirers was Alexander Pope. 20 years younger than Swift, Pope was a notably early developer, a prodigy, in fact, who was already outstanding in his teens and who wrote one of his masterpieces, an essay on criticism, when he was only 21. Prevented by his lameness and general ill health from formally attending school, and prevented by his Roman Catholic faith from attending university, he had sufficient income from his father simply to spend his time in reading and writing. He quickly became a success, even a financial success as a poet. By the age of 30, he was rich and famous. Looking back at his early years, he wrote, "Why did I write? What sin to me unknown dipped me in ink, my parents' or my own? As yet a child, nor yet a fool to fame, I lisped in numbers, for the numbers came. I left no calling for this idle trade, no duty broke, no father disobeyed. The muse but served to ease some friend, not wife, to help me through this long disease, my life." Those lines come from a verse letter to a friend, the Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. Someone as successful and waspish as Pope was bound to make enemies. One of these was Lord Hervey. In the Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot, Hervey is held up to incomparable scorn, loathing, and vituperation under the name Sporus. "Let Sporus tremble." What? That thing of silk? Sporus, that mere white curd of ass's milk? Satire or sense, alas, can Sporus feel? Who breaks a butterfly upon a wheel? Yet let me flap this bug with gilded wings, this painted child of dirt that stinks and stings, whose buzz the witty and the fair annoys, yet wit ne'er tastes and beauty ne'er enjoys. So well-bred spaniels civilly delight in mumbling of the game they dare not bite. Eternal smiles his emptiness betray, as shallow streams run dimpling all the way. Whether in florid impotence he speaks, and as the prompter breathes, the puppet squeaks, or at the ear of Eve, familiar toad, half froth, half venom, spits himself abroad in puns or politics or tales or lies or spite or smut or rhymes or blasphemies. His wit all seesaw between that and this, now high, now low, now master up, now miss, and he himself one vile antithesis. Amphibious thing, that acting either part, the trifling head or the corrupted heart, fop at the toilet, flatterer at the board, now trips a lady, and now struts a lord. Eve's tempter thus the rabbins have expressed, a cherub's face, a reptile all the rest, beauty that shocks you, parts that none will trust, wit that can creep, and pride that licks the dust. Earlier, Pope had published a massive mock-heroic poem on what he saw as the powerful and creeping disease of pedantry, pretentiousness, commercialism, and sheer bad writing. He called it the Dunciad, in imitation of Homer's Iliad and of Virgil's Aeneid. As a lurid vision of the triumph of chaos and dullness, the Dunciad is like a beautifully organized nightmare. Here is a prophecy of the death of the age of reason, and here are its closing lines. In vain, the all-composing hour resistless falls, the muse obeys the power. She comes, the sable throne behold of night primeval and of chaos old. Before her fancy's gilded clouds decay, and all its varying rainbows die away. Wit shoots in vain its momentary fires, the meteor drops and in a flash expires. As one by one, at dread Medea's strain, the sickening stars fade off the ethereal plain, as Argus eyes by Hermes' wand oppressed, closed one by one to everlasting rest. Thus at her felt approach and secret might, art after art goes out, and all is night. See skulking truth to her old cavern fled, mountains of casuistry heaped o'er her head. Philosophy that leaned on heaven before shrinks to her second cause and is no more. Physic of metaphysic begs defense, and metaphysic calls for aid on sense. See mystery to mathematics fly, in vain they gaze, turn giddy, rave, and die. Religion blushing veils her sacred fires, and unawares morality expires. Nor public flame, nor private dares to shine, nor human spark is left, nor glimpse divine. Lo, thy dread empire, chaos is restored. Light dies before thy uncreating word. Thy hand, great anarch, lets the curtain fall, and universal darkness buries all.